Hello comrades, it's the Finnish Bolshevik. This is kind of a different topic from my usual stuff. I'm gonna be reacting to a video talking about the fact that Americans and presumably people in all other first world countries or imperialist countries are becoming less and less literate. They're less and less able to read, to the point that even university students who are studying English or literature or something like that, they cannot read an entire book. And in my opinion, well, there are several reasons for this, but I think the underlying reason is the decay of imperialist capitalist culture and society. Capitalist culture is decaying, it's becoming stupider and stupider. Everybody knows this. Everybody understands this in some way. They may not talk about it in that way, they may not use those words to describe it. But basically, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, the final stage of capitalism, is a decaying, rotting system. And I think another phenomena, which I'm not going to make a separate video about that, but another interesting phenomena I've noticed is that, you know how right-wing conservatism is like trendy again? It's like it's hip and cool to be a conservative now. It's hip and cool to be trad. And, you know, there was the whole alt-right thing like years ago, but I don't think this is really the same thing as the alt-right and like the Trump movement or MAGA movement or whatever. It's related, but those things were, I think, largely also about opposing immigration. When I was growing up, everybody was becoming more and more liberal, or everybody had already become like really liberal. Liberalism was the prevailing like youth culture, and nowadays there's like pushback against that, and I think there is like this sort of natural dialectic of, you know, the establishment is conservative, then the youth is liberal, the establishment is liberal, then the youth is conservative. Like there's surely something like that going on, but I think it relates to this illiteracy problem in the sense that I've been watching a bunch of like literature YouTubers, like YouTubers who talk about classic literature, ancient Greek literature, 19th century realist literature, or what have you, or Shakespeare, or what have you. And some of those people are absolute morons. It's really annoying. Like, some of them are quite charming. Like, I watched some people talk about, like, Tolstoy. It's, you know, I like that kind of content. I was reading Tolstoy, then I was watching videos where people have a conversation about the book that I was reading. But some of the content is really stupid. Like, I don't remember who it was, but there was some literature YouTuber who, or booktuber as they call themselves, who was saying how, like, the government is censoring books, so you should build your own library. And I'm like, well, yeah, building your own library is a great idea. You should definitely have a lot of physical books, especially if they're rare books like you can't get from anywhere. Yeah. Like, get books, but I also like to scan books and share them with people, especially if they're old books that don't even have copyright anymore. Not that I even believe in copyright as a communist, but whatever. But the guy was saying that you should have your own library because the government is censoring books, and what he meant by that is that the government, or I don't even know if it is the government, maybe it's just the publisher, like who knows, but the publisher or whoever was like changing racist slurs into something else. I don't know why I went on this side tangent, but yeah, like I've been watching a bunch of that booktube content, and some of those people most of them are right-wing and conservative, and a lot of them are really stupid. Some of them are intelligent enough, even though they are right-wing. But it's just interesting, like I've noticed that basically imperialist decay of culture and society has two aspects to it. There's the liberals, they want to get rid of everything from the past. They think, okay, Aristotle supported slavery, therefore don't read Aristotle. Aristotle was a moron, throw Aristotle into the garbage. Even though Aristotle was like the smartest guy in antiquity. You can understand the limitations of a person or limitations of a certain time period, but you shouldn't get rid of it altogether. Or I suppose you could take even Shakespeare, like say that Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, that it's anti-Semitic. Possibly it is. There's a lot of debate about whether or not it is anti-Semitic. So there's a conservative backlash to the fact that liberals want to get rid of everything from the past. There are reactionary and wrong traditions, but there are also progressive traditions. And we can only move forward based on developing the stuff we have inherited from the past. and perfecting it and refining it. So then what conservatives want to do, they want to just return to the past and get rid of everything new. And they don't just want to return to good old ideas, they want to return to the bad old ideas. That's why, like, you see Neoplatonism and, like, medieval scholasticism, like, becoming more popular. Like, people want to return to the philosophy of the Middle Ages, which is just dumb as hell. Only doing postmodernism and saying that everything is subjective, and yeah, that has its problems, but returning to the philosophy of the Middle Ages is not the solution. There's a lot of these, like, conservative booktubers who talk about, like, yeah, we should just read Plato and read Aristotle and, like, read some old stuff, and then they think they're some kind of mega planet brain because they read Sophocles once. They're also, like, trad and Christian and racist. Like, I was watching one booktube YouTuber who was having a conversation about Plato, and, you know, I've read Plato. Plato was wrong about most things in terms of philosophy, but he was a smart guy. Plato is a major philosopher, though he was a major idealist as well. But I was watching that video and they were talking about the apologia of Socrates, like Socrates defending himself from his accusers. And they were saying, like, yeah, this is just like Jordan Peterson defending himself. Like, what the fuck? Like, that is the dumbest thing I've heard in a really long time. Anyway, I've been seeing this fact that people can't read, and that liberals make people stupider, and also that conservatives, like, react to that by also saying stupid things. The problem with conservatives is that they want to read old things uncritically. No, don't read them uncritically. You can read Aristotle's physics, and then you have to think about, like, well, what is he right about, and what is he wrong about, and why is that? How was he able to come up with correct ideas, and why did he sometimes come up with wrong ideas? But let's get into this. I've been going for way too long already, so let's get into this.
At universities all around the country, professors are reporting a problem. Students can't read books. This is true even at elite colleges and universities. In one required class at Columbia, students are often expected to read about a book a week.
Yeah, think about that. Students at elite colleges cannot read. I don't know how people get to American elite colleges. Is it just by being rich? Because rich people are stupid as hell, so that doesn't surprise me. But I don't know how that works. But a book a week, well, that depends a lot, like, what length we're talking about. Like, I remember when the war in Ukraine started, I started reading War and Peace by Tolstoy. Just pure coincidence, not because of the war or anything. I just started doing it. And it's a really long book, and it took me a couple months at least to read it. Granted, I did not actually read it. I listened to an audiobook, but still, it's a really long book. It took me months. You know, I was optimistic enough where I thought the war might end before I finished the book. Well, it didn't, unfortunately, but if you gotta read a book like that every week, then that's a tall order, but standard, like, 200-300 page book a week, that's a lot, in my opinion. In my opinion, that's a lot, but it's doable. Like, if you're doing that full time, if you're a student, like, I have a job, so I don't read quite as much as that, I think, but I have a job. If I didn't have anything else to do, then yeah, why not?
They're telling their professors that they can't do it. One student told her professor that she had never been required to read an entire book. This is
insane. Like, how the hell have the Americans gotten to this point? Like, even in my school education, I think the Finnish education system has gone down the drain a long time ago. I have a video about that, I'll link that in the description. But when I was in elementary school, we only read parts of some books. Granted, some of those were important books. One of the greatest Finnish, if not the greatest Finnish works of fiction, Seven Brothers by Alexis Kivi. We also read parts of Kalevala, the Finnish national epic. So those are probably the biggest things that you should know about Finnish literature. We got familiar with those in elementary school a little bit already, and then continued in middle school. I think in middle school we were told to read one book, and then in high school we had to read The Unknown Soldier. That's kind of a complicated book. It's kind of like a realistic work, but the author of it was like a right-wing social democrat. It's about the Winter War and Continuation War. Well, it's mostly about the Continuation War. Over the years, it has been co-opted by the Finnish state regime, and it is now used as a major propaganda weapon against the Soviet Union and against even modern Russia. It's used to build this whole cult of the Winter War. It's a well-written book, so it kind of works. And there's also a movie about it, which is played on the TV every single Independence Day. That was the only specific one we were required to read. And then we had another one where we could choose. We had to read like a work of utopia or dystopia, and I read Orwell. We were required to read a couple books like throughout our whole compulsory education, and as you can see, there was some like decent stuff in there, but it was mostly just like anti-communist propaganda, like Unknown Soldier, Orwell, shit like that. So the Finnish education system in terms of culture and literature is not good. But this, not required to read a single book throughout your whole public education? What? How is that possible? Don't they understand that you will not become properly literate if you never read? Is it deliberate? Remember, capitalists don't want people to be smart. They want to teach people certain skills so that they can become workers and produce value. Capitalists also want to educate a capitalist intelligentsia, which is a small group of people that helps the capitalists run everything, like lawyers and judges and administrators and scientists and ideologues and whatever. But those are a relatively small number of people. So maybe it's even deliberate.
People aren't reading anymore. This is true for men and women, people who went to college and people who didn't. So what's going on? Well, it turns out that there are many pieces to this puzzle, but it all begins with how we teach kids to read. For a very long time, we taught kids to read in a very particular way. We called it phonics.
Okay, so I'm gonna skip this because he just says that this change in the way they teach was a huge mistake, and maybe it was, but I don't really buy it, and he even goes on to say that that's not the only reason, because I don't even know what that is. We've never had that in this country as far as I know. I don't know what whole language reading is and what like phonics is.
If you weren't taught how to read properly, reading is never going to be something that you do for fun. It's never going to be pleasurable. It's going to feel really difficult and like a lot of work. And so if more and more people find reading difficult, then they're just going to stop reading.
Yeah, but if you're functionally illiterate, then that means you can't read instructions on if you buy like you buy a washing machine and you can't read the instructions, or if you try to pay your taxes and it says how you're supposed to do it and you can't read the instructions, or like you can't read traffic regulations, like you just can't read things like that. You go to the grocery store, you see the stuff, like surely you read what it says, then you buy it, and then you go to the credit card reader, it says like insert credit card, and then you insert it. Like sure, you have to be able to read that it says insert credit card. So I don't think the problem is that people literally can't read, is that they don't have the stamina to read. They don't have the stamina to read long things. I think that's the problem. Although, maybe there is like a problem with reading comprehension as well.
Informational text and standardized testing. When students were being taught how to engage with the text, they were learning how to extract information from it. You even see people say that books were outdated and that we needed to teach kids about the text that they would actually encounter in real life, like articles or web pages.
I've also kind of seen some of this. Maybe I talked about this in my video about Finnish education, I don't remember, but in high school, I was always told, like in history class, that you don't have to memorize any of the years, let alone dates of when things happened. That you should just understand like the general narrative of like how things go. Which, I mean, yeah, understanding like a logical narrative of how events take place, that's, first of all, it's easier and it's probably more important than memorizing years, but they always said like in every subject, oh, you don't have to memorize. Like in math, you don't have to memorize formulas. You can just get them from, we had a separate book with like all the different formulas in it, which we were allowed to use in tests. You don't have to memorize this or that because you can just find it online whenever you need it. And of course, you can also use a calculator so you don't have to do math in your head. And to a certain extent, that maybe makes sense, but it's not a bad thing to remember stuff. Like in ancient times, like in ancient China or like the medieval Europe, yeah, people usually learned by memorizing, and then they were not able to creatively apply that necessarily. Although they were kind of able to apply the syllogisms of Aristotle. But yeah, it does make you kind of a mechanistic thinker, and it kind of makes you into a human calculating machine. Like somebody says something, then your brain recognizes that, oh yeah, this is logical fallacy number 11 that Aristotle talks about. Insert Aristotle's refutation just from memory. Like, it does make you kind of a mechanistic thinker, but still, if you don't even remember anything, then you can't do anything. You have to first remember some basic facts and then creatively apply them. How could I talk about communism if I don't remember that The October Revolution happened in 1917. Lenin died in 1924. I mean, at least if you are interested in history, then you have to remember when things happened. Even in our high school, we had this whole trend of you don't gotta remember anything, you can just look it up on Wikipedia, which is definitely making people stupider. You don't have any basic level of education, any basic level of civilization. It's just go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is horrible. I mean, I'm not gonna go like all conspiratorial, but that truly sounds dystopian, where imagine if people really didn't remember anything and they were just told to go online, and then whoever controls what's online could just change history willy-nilly because people don't remember anything.
Symbolism or theme, or being able to practice your close reading of text, you were mostly focused on extracting information from those excerpts. Doing that traditional English stuff like close reading builds something that we could call your reading stamina. And when a student who is fully capable of...
Yeah, I wonder why they decided that we don't read long books anymore. Instead we get excerpts and then we just try to glean information from them. Is it because of time constraints?
Reading says that they can't read a whole book in a week, it's likely because they haven't had a chance to develop their reading stamina. In fact, some professors and teachers, even in high schools or middle schools, say that kids' reading stamina has been declining steadily over the years as well. If you're trying to build your...
Yeah, I think this is really key, that people's reading stamina has gone down because people just don't read anymore, and there's a plethora of reasons. Some of them are objective, unavoidable reasons, and some of them are definitely avoidable. In the 70s, a lot of people no longer read books, they more just read comics and they watch TV. Nowadays they don't even read comic books anymore. They watch TV and now they watch TikTok or whatever. So some of those are basically technological reasons that have caused that, and some of those are just caused by the fact that imperialist culture has gotten worse and worse over time. In the Soviet Union, students read and recited and memorized Pushkin. In socialist Hungary, they had what they called book days. There were good books being sold everywhere and people would buy them and talk about them and enjoy them. Socialist countries in general just published more books than capitalist countries, and people read more than in capitalist countries. And the kind of commercial garbage that prevailed in capitalist countries already back in the day, already in the 50s and 60s and 70s, that kind of culture barely even existed in socialist countries. Of course there was entertainment, there were entertainment magazines, satirical magazines, but even those were kind of high quality, like the Ludashmati movie had music made by like really big composers. And in general, like, literature was a bigger part of culture, I think. So it was partially a technological advancement, but it was also a political choice, like what the government wants to do. In the US, I guess it wasn't called a culture war back then, but it kind of, in the war of what kind of culture they want, I guess they promoted mostly just religion, superheroes, I guess, and like anti-communist comic books and anti-communist, like really dumbed down propaganda. And then the commercial stuff that they promoted was like about gangsters and being a soldier in Korea, being a soldier in Vietnam, like glorifying those kinds of atrocities, which is all ideological. It's not just entertainment. There's two aspects to it. Like, that kind of entertainment has a political message, and even when it doesn't have a conscious or explicit political message, the political content of it is to make people apathetic, stupid, ignorant. And it's largely related to the fact that, like, in socialist countries, it was considered necessary that people become cultured, that humanity must become a new kind of humanity, that they need to create a new communist person, a person who is educated and ethical, etc., etc. Whereas in capitalism, they can say whatever they want to say, but the fact that a new communist person is necessary, that is required by the very economic logic of communism. That is regardless of what any politician wants. In order for socialism to progress and communism to be achieved, people need to become smarter and better all the time. But for capitalism, capitalists don't want people to become smart enough to challenge them. They want people to just have the required skills so that they can perform their job. And that's also because it costs money to educate people. So, well, you can go about that a number of different ways. You can do it like the Americans do it, which is by having insanely high tuition costs, which ensures that poor people don't receive education. Thus, the intelligentsia is automatically mostly coming from the rich people, or people who maybe come from poor background, but then they are incorporated into the rich elite. Or you can do it with taxpayer money, but that just gives capitalists an even higher incentive to only give a very bare bones education because it costs money, to give people a broad education. My personal experience with reading is that maybe this can be helpful to some people. Growing up, I also did not like reading, and I didn't read a lot. There were just other things to do. That's, I guess, another big aspect of this. As a kid, I wanted to play video games, but I got interested in science fiction and also horror. And then I found that there's a lot of audiobooks on the internet, so I would listen to like H.G. Wells, Jules Verne audiobooks, and then like Robert Louis Stevenson, Edgar Allan Poe, definitely, like a lot of those kinds of things, which, to be honest, that's not bad. To be honest, that's good stuff. I remember as a kid, I bought this big book of Edgar Allan Poe, and I didn't have the patience to read it, but I did listen to those audiobooks. So I was always kind of interested in reading, but since I had the option of listening to audiobooks, I preferred to just listen instead of reading. Then I got really into H.P. Lovecraft. I got more deeper into that genre, and then I wanted to read more like other people in that same genre. And those things did not exist in audio form, so then I had to hunt them down as actual books and start reading them. So finally I started to read quite a lot because I was interested enough in the genre, and the only way to get access to it was to just read it, so then I just had to read. So that's kind of how I got into reading. And when you're doing it, then slowly you build stamina for it, so you're able to read more. And what I would do is, because when you're at home, you have so much stuff to do, like be on the computer or do whatever you want to do. So there's a lot of distractions. So I think people don't oftentimes sit in an armchair just reading like for hours. Instead, what I always did is, if I use public transport, like if I was on the bus for like half an hour, I would be reading. Like during recess, between classes, I would be reading a lot of times. If I went to the bus stop and I had to wait for the bus to come there, I would be reading. So if, anytime I would go somewhere and I had some time where I had to like just wait or something, then I would always use that time to read. So I tried to be pretty efficient with my time in that sense. And I still do that to this day. Like at work, nearly always during my lunch break I read. And nearly always during my coffee break at work I read every single day. So that way I go through books at a steady pace all the time. On top of that, I also listen to audiobooks still, because why not? I prefer audiobooks to actually reading, but I still read real books all the time too. I kind of have a system where usually when I'm reading, I read Finnish books, and then when I'm listening to audiobooks, I listen to English language books. Usually, because most audiobooks are in English and not in Finnish. So if I know that there's an audiobook of this book, then I don't bother reading it. I'll just listen to it instead. And I've kind of built this habit, this routine, where I work in the factory, then I go on a coffee break, I'll read, then I go back to work, then I do that again. Or I go on a long trip, like sit in the bus for like 3 hours, I'll just spend that time reading. And I've gotten really used to it. Sometimes the material I'm reading is very interesting, sometimes it's really not very interesting, but I'll still power through it, and then I feel like I've achieved something. If I don't do it, if instead I were to scroll social media or something instead, I would feel like I'm being lazy. I should be doing something productive. So I think it can be useful to try to build up like a routine or some kind of thing where you're able to read even a little bit each day, and then build up tolerance to it, and then build up like the sense that if you read, you feel like you've achieved something, and if you don't read, then you feel like you were being lazy, and that you should feel a little bit bad about yourself. I'm definitely in the camp of people who read at the bus stop and in the bus and waiting in line, like somewhere. If you're waiting in a long line, I don't care, I'll read. I don't care if I have to wait. If I have to like go and pick somebody up and I need to wait for them, I don't care. The time is not wasted. I can read. So I definitely encourage that.
Your reading stamina, one of the things you can do is just read books. Just sit down and try to see how many pages you can get through before you have to go and do something else. But students increasingly aren't actually being given those opportunities in the classroom or even in assignments. In one survey, only 17% of educators said that they were teaching primarily with whole text.
I've heard a lot of people don't even study for high school exams, but like I had a specific time. I would wake up at a certain time, then I would study, let's say, history for a certain number of hours, like a couple hours. Then I would study, I think, math for a couple hours. That was like for the high school, like final exams. I would do that. We had a vacation where we didn't have to go to school. We could just study for the exams. I think people have to do that. You have to be able to do that. If you can't do that, then what can you do? If you can't tolerate studying something for a couple hours, even if you absolutely have to, if you're doing that full time, start doing it, and then it'll get easier. History was one of my best subjects. Math was my worst subject. I absolutely sucked at math, and if I did not study it for several hours a day for like at least a couple weeks, I would have failed, no doubt about it. English, I barely studied at all. I didn't have to.
This is the better explanation for why students at Columbia or other great universities aren't able to read whole books. These students were able to get into some of the best colleges and universities in the world, but they were never taught how to be great readers. They were taught how to be great test takers. So when these students get to college and they're asked to read whole books, they can't do it because this is a completely different skill than they've been told that they need to develop in high school. So much of their education has been about optimizing themselves for standardized tests.
I'm sure that's true, but you should also try to like find a way to make what you're doing more interesting. Like, what are they studying then? If they're studying history, then don't they find history interesting? If they're studying literature, then don't they find literature interesting? Like, I'm working in the factory, I listen to Tolstoy, I think it's really interesting. Form an opinion about what you're reading. Like, it's more interesting that way. Like, if you're reading, let's say you're reading Tolstoy, or you're listening to Tolstoy, like, if you're a communist, then read what Lenin said about Tolstoy. Lenin has at least 2 articles on Tolstoy, maybe more, where he talks about how Tolstoy is a realistic author, but he's kind of from a previous period, like from before 1905, 1906. Before that revolution, he's mostly just depicting the era of serfdom, or the struggle against serfdom, and that Tolstoy is like a democratic, progressive, realist, anti-serfdom author, so that's progressive thing, but then he's also a religious, pacifistic mystic, and that he's also outdated. He cannot properly understand what's been happening since 1905, or maybe even since the 1860s when serfdom collapsed. Although, of course, it's not so simple because serfdom only legally collapsed, but it still de facto continued for a while, even into the early 1900s. But in any case, like, that's what Lenin says about Tolstoy. Then you read Tolstoy and you see, like, oh yeah, this is, I understand what he means, like, form an opinion about it, think about it, like, try to understand what it means, what's the context behind it, what's the political content in the work or something like. Or if I'm reading a historian, I always think, like, okay, what is this guy trying to say, what are the things that I agree with, what are the things I don't agree with, like, do you think I enjoyed reading Orlando Feige's A People's Tragedy? It's 1,000 pages. I didn't like it. There's some parts of it that are decent, but I did not like it. But I felt like he's a famous author. It's almost like a standard text in the field nowadays. Everybody's talking about it. So now I know what it says. So even though I wouldn't say that I enjoyed it, but in a sense it was interesting. I don't know, like, am I just a dumbass? Am I just a boomer? Like, do I just not understand? My understanding has always been that if you don't know how to do something, then try it, and eventually you'll get better at it. Maybe I just don't get it. I don't get bored very easily. I don't have ADD. But then again, I do relate to the fact that I used to not be able to read, and then I started reading.
Test, and then eventually to take something like the SAT or the ACT. And if you're just trying to do really well on a standardized test, you need to focus on reading excerpts and being able to answer multiple. You don't have to focus on analyzing themes in Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Dickens. You don't have to worry about reading great books. So then if you have a required freshman class that's about great novels in the Western tradition, well, this might be your first time being exposed to many of those great novels in the Western tradition.
Yeah, like when I was reading Dostoevsky is such a contradictory writer. When I was reading Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, the whole time I was thinking, what the fuck does this mean? Like, what is he trying to say? What's the point of this? What is he trying to push? What is the political message being pushed here? And it's very contradictory. The whole book is very contradictory. Dostoevsky as a figure was very contradictory, used to be a revolutionary, became a reactionary, like all that stuff. I also read what Lenin, that's, a go-to if you can go and see what Lenin thought about it. Lenin, at one point he said that Dostoevsky wrote some really ingenious stuff, and then at another point, I think he was talking about Brothers Karamazov, he said that it's like the worst garbage he's ever read, that he didn't even finish it, that it was disgusting. So, very contradictory even in that respect. And also, like when I was reading Crime and Punishment, I was thinking like, do I like, is this realistic? Is it not realistic? Like, do I like the style of this? Like, is this decadence? Because it is, like, it has so many different things in it. Because it is kind of realistic, but there's also so much, like, this horrific stuff in it. In Finnish, we have this term called, like, I don't know if there's an English equivalent, but it's like decay romanticism or decadence romanticism. It kind of means, like, purposefully ugly, you know. It's glorifying ugliness in a way, and I was really trying to think, like, what do I think about that? So, I don't know. It definitely was not boring, because I was constantly, my mind was racing, like, what is this? What is this?
And it's going to be hard because you're not used to it. So when we look at the big picture, we have some students who were never taught how to read properly because of things like whole language learning. And then we have students who were never taught how to read books because of an emphasis on standardized testing. But when we want to talk about why other people have stopped reading for fun or just stopped reading, there's one more thing we have to talk about, and it's the phones. So something that gets overlooked in a lot of these discussions is that many people actually do spend their days reading. It's just that they're not reading books. If you're scrolling on YouTube or Twitter, then you are actually encountering an endless stream of text. More text than many people throughout history would have encountered in a week.
Yeah, this is what I was saying earlier, how people are not functionally literate. They can read. You know, you can read the title of this video.
It just doesn't really want to give you the time that it takes to read a good book. It's just my backyard, and occasionally I'll come and I'll bring the book, and I'll try to get some reading done. It's peaceful, and it's quiet, and it's one of the places that I really love. So maybe I start reading the book, and I'll feel really good, and then within just a few seconds, this thing wants my attention. So if I want to get any reading done, I have to be disciplined, and I have to decide that my phone needs to stay inside, someplace where it can't distract me. Now imagine that you're a college student and you've never read a full book in a week, or really ever been asked to read a hard...
To be honest, like, I have the opposite thing going on. Whenever I can, I'll listen to an audiobook, or I'll read a real book. Sometimes I feel like I need to give myself just time to think, instead of just constantly reading or listening. Because when I'm working in the factory, I'll be listening. Then I go on my coffee break, I'll get my book out and I'll start reading. I drive home, I'm listening. You know, if I'm doing the dishes, I'm listening. And, well, why do I do that? Well, because there's a lot of stuff out there that I have to read. At least I feel like I have to read a lot. There's a lot of stuff I haven't read, so I feel like I have to. And, you know, let's be real, there's a lot of things that I don't have the answers to, and I feel like if I read books, I'll find answers. And I have found answers to a bunch of stuff in books. And also talking to people. Well, I'm not gonna get into a whole epistemological discussion about the role of, like, praxis and, like, personal, like, doing something and learning by doing and whatnot. But I feel like if I'm not reading or listening to a book or doing something I feel like I should be, if I drive to the grocery store to buy food, why would I not listen to an audiobook while I'm driving? So I don't have this thing where the phone keeps distracting me. Instead, I feel like I am trying to read and I want to read, and then other things keep distracting me from it, and I sometimes grudgingly, like, do the other stuff.
For your education. And your professor says, hey, I want you to read Homer's Iliad in a week. Let's say you're a good sport too, and so you go to your dorm room, you get your book, and you say, you know what, I'm going to do it. Now think about all the things that are there that distract you. Other people, or your phone, or your laptop. Anything with a screen, really, is there. And
no. Play Minecraft, listen to the audiobook of the Iliad, easy. Then maybe watch some YouTube videos where people talk about the Iliad to, like, help you become more familiar with it, like memorize a little bit, like, what happens in it. With the Iliad, I think if you read it in poetry form, then that can be more difficult, but there are prose versions of it. You can debate if it's the same or different to read it in verse or prose, but that's a difficult question, but since you're not reading it in the original language anyway, maybe it's not so important. But no, fucking Iliad, easy as pie. But then you gotta figure out what it means. And I'm not gonna go into it, but the morality in the Iliad is so different from our modern morality.
It's ready to just make you feel more stimulated. Because let's face it, even if we're people who really like to read, compared to doing other things, the act of reading is really boring. It is the antithesis of our sort of constant need to be overstimulated. A lot of schools, high schools, middle schools, things like that, have decided...
Yeah, I agree. It oftentimes is boring, but that's what I'm saying. Like, play Minecraft, listen to the Iliad. Like, as long as the game doesn't distract you, then it can actually help you. It stops you from being bored. I haven't had time to play Minecraft in, like, a couple weeks, but when I do play Minecraft, or Age of Empires, for instance, like, in Age of Empires, I just practice the game. I just do the same thing over and over again, and I listen to a book. Or if I'm playing Minecraft, I've been doing a nether perimeter, if you know what that is, which means just you're just digging a gigantic hole in the nether. I've been doing that for years. And listening to books, or listening to some, like, other stuff. And, well, digging a hole in the nether would be really boring, but also maybe listening to the book might be boring. But if you put them together, then you can do it. I'm an advocate of that.
Start banning smartphones from the classroom. And my reaction, of course, is like, what took you so long? Of course, students aren't going to be able to read or learn properly if they're constantly distracted by their phones. So not only have we systematically failed students as we've taught them to read, or not taught them to read in some cases, we've also just designed a world that is there to constantly demand our attention. And that takes us away from those deep or reflective, sort of focus-heavy practices like reading good books. So when adults try to say why they don't read anymore, they usually cite three things. They don't have time, they can't pay attention long enough, or they blame social media. And I suspect that all of these are related. The fact that we don't have time.
A lot of times social media is a waste of time. Like, sometimes it's good to be able to see what's happening in the world, and to a certain extent it's good to be able to talk to people and be exposed to new ideas. But you can spend all day, every day, just talking to people on the internet, and you won't have time to do anything else. So that's why I don't do that very much. I do it a little bit, and I receive messages from people, and I try to answer them, and, I do answer them. But it takes time. Like, answering a complicated, if somebody sends me a long message, asks a bunch of shit, it's gonna take me like an hour, maybe 30 minutes to an hour to answer. I don't understand the appeal of social media, unless you don't have anything to do.
Who read tons of books, and they keep the average numbers up. But you have more and more people who decide that reading just isn't for them. I don't know exactly what we're supposed to do about that, but that's where we are.
Well, it's good that people have at least recognized this problem. I had a sort of a terrifying thought the other day. I thought, so there's a bunch of good literature out there, obviously. And there is even some new literature that's not bad, even though, I think capitalism is becoming more and more moribund and worse all the time. But I thought that, let's say that TV and comic books killed literature, killed people's reading habit. I thought maybe Audible, and I thought that maybe those audiobook services would kind of bring books back, and I think to an extent they have. Then I realized that most of the stuff on there is still crap. I thought that it would be a good thing, but then I instantly realized that it's actually a bad thing, that the capitalists and the corporations are able to control people's reading and control culture even more now. Because if people actually read books, there's a lot of good books out there. This is especially true about Finnish literature. They could be reading some critical realist stuff from the late 1800s, early 1900s, or from the mid 1900s. Hell, they could even be reading socialist realism. They could be reading something truly good, because those exist in book form. They're widely available, easy to get. The fact that people don't read books, they rely on audiobooks, they rely on what's on Audible, well, then that means that all that stuff's out. Maybe the absolute biggest classics are on there. Maybe Quiet Flows the Dawn is on Audible, and some Maxim Gorky probably, The Mother. But apart from that, there's no socialist realism on Audible, I bet. There is some Lu Xuan on Audible, actually for free, so I recommend that. Lu Xuan is not socialist realism, but it is realism. And Lu Xuan was a communist. So, in a way, audiobooks have kind of brought books back, but still in a worse form. The selection is more limited, because only those books that the corporations want to turn into audiobooks, only those get actually turned into audiobooks, and only those books are then read by the public.